The desert night was still, broken only by the soft rustling of sand against the wind. Grant pulled his collar tighter around his neck, shifting his gaze across the empty, moonlit horizon. Nothing but sand dunes and rocks under a cold, unforgiving sky. It was exactly why he'd come here, to find quiet in the emptiness, a reprieve from the noise that cities couldn't silence. The desert, at least, had nothing to hide. He was a man out of place in most of the world these days. An ex-soldier with a past he rarely mentioned, he found solace in solitude and the slow, rhythmic rituals of living far from anyone. Grant felt that peace now, his boots crunching against the sand as he made his way back to the rundown cabin he called home. But something pricked at the edge of his senses, a sound that didn't belong. He froze, his eyes narrowing in the moonlight. It was faint but unmistakable, a low, keening hum, like metal vibrating just out of sight. He stepped forward, eyes trained on the dark horizon, half expecting some stray drone or curious coyote. But what he saw was neither. There, lying prone against a nearby dune, was a figure. Moonlight cast a faint sheen across the body, highlighting a strange silvery glimmer. He approached cautiously, his instincts flaring up, the ones that told him to be ready for anything. Closer now, he realized it was a woman, human, or at least humanoid. Her figure slight and strange, wrapped in fabric that looked metallic yet soft, shimmering in colors he couldn't name. She stirred, and his heart skipped a beat when her eyes met his. They were wide, a pale color that seemed to hold the stars themselves, filled with both wariness and curiosity. She tried to lift her head, but her strength gave out. He crouched down, speaking softly. "You all right?" His voice was gruff, unsure. He wasn't used to meeting people out here, especially ones who looked like they'd fallen from the stars. The woman's gaze drifted over him, taking him in, assessing him as he did her. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, musical, with an accent that he couldn't place, like the words had traveled far to reach her lips. "Where am I?" she whispered. He blinked. "Arizona," he replied. "Far enough from anything, if that's what you were aiming for." She looked around, brow furrowing as if the word held no meaning for her. "I need to get back," she murmured, more to herself than to him. Grant tilted his head. "Back? You alone out here?" A flash of something crossed her face, something close to pain or perhaps fear, but it vanished as quickly as it had come. "Yes, alone," she answered carefully. "And you?" He frowned, unsettled by the question. "Me? I live around here," he replied, nodding toward the hills. "But you don't seem like the camping type." Her gaze met his, a strange mixture of distrust and gratitude. "You could say that," she whispered, her hand moving to her side. It was then he saw the blood, dark and slick against her strange fabric. "Damn," he muttered, reaching for the med kit tucked in his jacket. "Hold still." He wasn't one to meddle in other people's affairs, but he couldn't leave her bleeding out in the middle of nowhere. The soldier in him wouldn't let him. She tensed, flinching at his touch, but he was patient. "Easy," he murmured. "I'm not here to hurt you." "You don't know who I am," she whispered, more to herself than to him. He chuckled softly. "I don't think I need to. Just looks like you need help." She seemed to consider his words as if weighing their truth. After a moment, she gave a curt nod. "Very well," she murmured. Her gaze softened, if only by a fraction. "Thank you, Grant." The familiarity with which she spoke his name startled him. "How'd you keep thinking it," she answered simply, her voice edged with something almost playful. He swallowed, unnerved. "You can hear my thoughts?" "I hear much more than you'd expect," she replied, her tone veiled. "It's a part of who I am." He said nothing, concentrating on dressing the wound instead. But the questions pounded in his mind. Who was she? What was she doing here, bleeding under the stars? When he finished, she gave him a small nod. "You have my thanks, Grant." "Least I could do," he replied, slipping his medkit back into his jacket. Can you walk? I believe so, she said, though her expression told him otherwise. He hesitated, his eyes drifting toward the horizon. Look, I've got a cabin nearby, he said slowly, unsure why he was even offering. You can rest up there until you're ready to go, safer than staying out here. For a moment she seemed torn, her gaze shifting between him and the desert around them. You trust strangers, Grant? He gave a wry smile. Not usually, but I figure if you were here to cause trouble, you wouldn't be bleeding all over the sand. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Fair point, she replied softly, and with that, she rose slowly, leaning on him as they made their way toward his cabin. The walk was silent, broken only by the crunch of sand beneath their feet and the occasional soft murmur from her. Finally, they reached the small worn structure that Grant called home. He pushed open the door and led her inside. She looked around, taking in the sparse furnishings with an expression of quiet curiosity. It's simple, she murmured. It's enough, he replied, closing the door behind them. Better than the alternative. She sat on the edge of his cot, her eyes drifting to the lone window, where the desert stretched on endlessly. I imagine it is, she said quietly, as if speaking from experience. There was a weight to her words, a kind of sadness that felt as vast and empty as the desert itself. What's your name? He asked, leaning against the door, studying her. She hesitated, her gaze flicking to his. Zarya, she replied after a long moment. Zarya, he repeated, tasting the unfamiliar name. So Zarya, what brings you out to the middle of nowhere? She looked down, as if choosing her words carefully. I was seeking something. Something important. Important enough to get you shot? He asked, his gaze narrowing. A faint smile crossed her lips. You could say that. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. Grant, I'll tell you this much. My being here is complicated. There are things about me that are not as you might expect. Try me, he said, intrigued despite himself. She met his gaze, her eyes flickering with a strange silvery light. Let's just say I'm not from around here. He chuckled dryly. Yeah, figured as much. Her gaze remained steady, unflinching. No, I mean, I'm not from this world. Her words hung in the air, suspended in the stillness of the cabin. He stared at her, caught between disbelief and a strange, creeping sense that she was telling the truth. You're saying you're an alien? She nodded, her expression calm. I am. Grant let out a slow breath, his mind racing. He'd seen a lot in his time as a soldier, but this was different. And you expect me to believe that? She tilted her head, studying him with those star-filled eyes. You're a man who's seen things others wouldn't understand, she murmured. And perhaps you're a man who can understand things others wouldn't believe. Grant ran a hand through his hair, trying to wrap his head around it all. So why here? Why Earth? Her gaze softened, and for the first time he saw a flicker of vulnerability in her. I had a duty, a mission, but things went wrong. Wrong how? She looked away, pain flashing across her face. There were those who didn't want me to succeed. I was forced to flee. And now they're after you? He asked, his voice low. She nodded. Yes, and they will not stop until they find me. Grant felt a chill settle in his bones. He'd been dragged into battles before, but nothing like this. So, what now? She looked at him, her expression hardening. Now, I need your help, Grant. If I'm to survive, if either of us are to survive, we need each other. The gravity of her words settled over him like a shroud. He didn't know what he'd just gotten himself into, but he knew one thing for certain. His life had just taken a turn he couldn't walk away from. and as he met her gaze, he realized he didn't want to. The next morning, sunlight crept in through the cracks of Grant's cabin, casting pale lines across the room. Zarya was already awake, seated by the narrow window, her gaze fixed on the desert beyond. She looked almost otherworldly in the dawn light, her silver hair catching glints of morning sun, her skin glowing with that strange, faint shimmer. Grant moved quietly, not wanting to startle her, though he wasn't sure she could be startled. After everything she'd told him, he wasn't even certain she slept at all. "Thinking of running off before breakfast?" he asked, keeping his tone light. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "You're awake," she replied, almost surprised. "I didn't want to disturb you." He walked over to her, arms crossed. "Disturb me? Lady, you just told me you're on the run from some interstellar bounty hunters or worse. I'd say I'm already disturbed." She tilted her head, studying him with a faint smile. "Yes, I suppose you are." There was something about the way she said it, like she was assessing him, deciding if he was up to the challenge of whatever storm she was bringing to his doorstep. He cleared his throat. "So, how does breakfast work for someone like you? Anything specific you eat?" Zarya seemed to consider the question for a moment before shaking her head. "I can manage with whatever you have," she said, "but I don't consume food the way you do." Grant raised an eyebrow. "Not sure I follow." She hesitated, glancing down at her hands as if the answer lay in the thin lines tracing her palms. "My body can absorb certain forms of energy directly. Light, for instance. Heat." "So, like a solar panel," he said, trying to wrap his mind around the concept. Her lips quirked up in a slight smile. "In a way, yes, though I have learned to appreciate Earth's food," she admitted. "You have a strange relationship with it." "Strange how?" he asked, pulling a couple of cans from the cupboard. "Humans imbue it with meaning," she said, her gaze thoughtful. "It's more than survival. Food is a ritual, a comfort. For many, it is a form of companionship." Grant paused, a bit thrown by the observation. "Never thought of it that way," he muttered, opening a can of beans. She watched him, those pale eyes of hers observing every movement. "You have a solitary life, don't you, Grant?" He let out a dry laugh. "That obvious?" She nodded. "You carry it with you, the solitude, like a shield." He didn't answer, busying himself with heating up the beans. Solitude was safer, he'd learned, after years of seeing too many people disappear too quickly. The less you cared about, the less you had to lose. But somehow Zarya had slipped past his guard, and he wasn't sure if he was annoyed or intrigued by it. Once the beans were hot, he passed her a plate. She took it gingerly, looking at the food with curiosity. He sat across from her, watching her reaction. "Go on, it's simple, but it'll keep you going." She picked up the fork, examining it as though it were a relic from an ancient civilization. Then, with the tiniest smile, she took a bite, chewing thoughtfully. "I can see why you enjoy this," she said, nodding as if she were evaluating it like fine art. "It's grounding." Grant laughed, the sound surprising him. "It's beans, Zarya, hardly anything fancy." She shrugged, a graceful gesture that seemed to encapsulate her entire otherworldly essence. "I suppose sometimes simplicity is what's most fascinating." He shook his head, still trying to wrap his mind around her. "So, what's next for you?" Her gaze drifted, as though searching for something beyond the cabin walls. "I need to finish what I came here to do," she murmured, "before they find me." "And what exactly did you come here to do?" he pressed, a hint of frustration creeping into his voice. "You're telling me you traveled halfway across the galaxy, at least, to stand around in the desert?" She looked back at him, her gaze sharp. "I came to find something," she replied quietly. "A device hidden on Earth. An artifact of great importance. But now, my enemies have followed me, and they will not rest until they have taken it from me." "An artifact," he repeated, brow furrowing. What? Like an alien weapon? Not a weapon, she corrected. A tool. One with the potential to restore balance to my realm, but also capable of unimaginable destruction if misused. Grant rubbed the back of his neck, trying to process the weight of her words. So if they find you, they will stop at nothing, she said, her voice like steel. There are those who would rather see worlds burn than let me succeed. Her words sent a chill through him. This was far bigger than anything he'd imagined, a cosmic conflict, one that could drag Earth into its wake, and somehow he was now a part of it. A sudden sound outside made them both tense. Grant's hand instinctively went to the rifle he kept by the door, while Zarya's expression darkened. They're close, she whispered, standing up. I can feel them. He grabbed his rifle, motioning for her to stay low. You mean those people after you? Zarya nodded, her voice barely a whisper. They're not people, not like you, and they're dangerous, Grant. We need to be careful. He peered out the small window, scanning the horizon. At first, he saw nothing, just the familiar stretch of sand and rock under the harsh sun. But then, something glinted in the distance, a metallic shimmer that caught the light, just for a moment. Damn, he muttered, heart pounding. Grant, she whispered, her hand reaching out to his arm. We should go. Now. He glanced back at her, noting the urgency in her expression. All right, but where? She hesitated, glancing out the window. Anywhere but here. The desert is vast. We can lose them in the dunes. He nodded, grabbing a small bag from under his bed. Stay close, he ordered, his tone gruff but protective. And don't wander off. The desert's unforgiving to those who don't know it. Zarya gave him a solemn nod, following him out the door. The sunlight was blinding, reflecting off the sand as they made their way across the rocky landscape. Grant could feel her tension beside him, her gaze darting to the horizon, as though expecting an attack at any moment. How far will they go to find you, he asked, keeping his voice low as they moved. As far as they need to, she replied, her tone grim. They're relentless. Hunters. And you? You some kind of leader back home? She hesitated, her eyes clouded. I was, she admitted, a hint of sorrow in her voice. I am a queen, though there are those who would gladly strip that title from me. Grant let out a low whistle. So, I've got a queen running from a pack of alien assassins in my backyard. Just another day in Arizona. She glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. You find humor in this? Just trying to keep things light, he replied, his tone darkening. Besides, if they're as close as you say, I'd rather laugh now than, well, you know. They continued on in silence, moving swiftly across the dunes. The desert stretched endlessly before them, and for a while, Grant began to think they might just make it. But then, a strange low hum filled the air, vibrating in his bones. He stopped, glancing back, and saw something that sent a jolt of fear through him. A black, sleek ship was approaching in the distance, skimming just above the sand, its form too streamlined, too unnatural to be anything human. Grant gripped his rifle, instincts kicking in. They're here, he said, voice tense. Zarya's gaze hardened, her body shifting into a defensive stance. We need to move faster, she murmured, or they'll catch us. Any chance that device of yours could come in handy right about now? He asked, half joking. She shook her head, her expression grim. Not yet. It's somewhere else. But I can protect us. For a time. She held out her hand, and he watched as the air around her seemed to pulse with energy, a faint shimmer of light that felt like static against his skin. What are you doing? He asked, eyes wide. Shielding us temporarily, she replied, her voice focused. But it won't last long. We must keep moving. They broke into a run, the hum of the ship growing louder behind them. Grant glanced back, heart pounding as he saw it gaining on them, its black hull gleaming in the sun. He gritted his teeth, pushing himself harder, his mind racing. He'd faced enemies before, but nothing like this. As the two pressed deeper into the desert, the hum of the alien craft became a steady roar, trailing them like a dark shadow. The heat was relentless, and even Grant, accustomed to the arid land, could feel its weight pressing down on him. They moved swiftly, but it was clear they couldn't keep running forever. "Grant," Zarya said breathlessly, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're closing in." He gritted his teeth, scanning the rocky terrain for any hint of cover. A steep slope jutted out just ahead, flanked by jagged rock formations that could shield them from view. "This way," he murmured, guiding her towards the cliffside. They scrambled up the slope, squeezing into a narrow crevice in the rock, and Grant peered out, heart pounding as he caught sight of the sleek alien craft skimming the sand below. Zarya's eyes were closed, her face tense, as though reaching for something beyond the physical realm. Grant felt an unnatural pressure build in the air around them, like static before a lightning strike. "Whatever you're doing, make it fast," he whispered, watching the ship circle closer. She opened her eyes, pale and resolute, meeting his gaze. "Grant, there's something you need to know," she said, her voice heavy with something deeper than fear. "I haven't been entirely honest with you." "Now's not the best time for confessions," he said, watching the ship's slow approach, but he couldn't ignore the pleading look in her eyes. "I have the device, Grant," she admitted, her tone barely a whisper. "I've had it with me this whole time, the artifact I came to Earth to retrieve. I carry it within me." He blinked, staring at her in disbelief. "What do you mean, within you?" Zarya reached up, placing a hand over her chest. "It's embedded within my heart. I'm a living vessel. They won't stop until they've taken it from me." Grant clenched his fists, a cold realization settling over him. "So they don't just want you, they want you dead." She nodded, her gaze unwavering. "But if I activate it, they'll be drawn to it, blinded by its power. And in that moment, I can destroy it. But doing so—" Her voice trailed off, and she looked away, her expression unreadable. "Doing so will kill you," he finished quietly. She looked back at him, and the silence between them felt as heavy as the desert heat. "Yes." Grant's jaw tightened, a surge of frustration and helplessness flooding through him. He had seen enough senseless sacrifice in his time, but the thought of Zarya, with her fierce resilience and quiet dignity, giving herself up like this, it felt unbearable. "There has to be another way," he said, his voice hard. Zarya's gaze softened. "This is the path I chose long ago. I knew the cost, Grant." He shook his head, refusing to accept it. "I don't care what choice you made then. You're here now. You deserve a chance to live, just like anyone else." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "You're kinder than I expected for a warrior." "Maybe you don't know me as well as you think," he muttered, glancing back at the alien ship as it hovered just beyond the rocks, its dark silhouette looming closer. Zarya took a deep breath, stepping forward and meeting his gaze, her expression resolute. "If you stay with me, you'll die as well," she said softly. "Grant, go. Leave me to this." He shook his head. "I didn't come this far to watch you throw your life away. Whatever happens, I'm not leaving you." She hesitated, a flicker of something unreadable passing through her gaze. "Grant." He reached out, grasping her hand, holding it tightly. "We faced them together. No more running." For a moment, they stood in silence, his hand warm around hers, the weight of her choice hanging between them. Then, with a resigned sigh, Zarya closed her eyes, and the air around them began to shift. A faint glow emerged from her chest, a light that pulsed with a quiet, steady rhythm. The hum of the alien craft grew louder, vibrating through the rocks, as if drawn to the beacon she had activated. The ship descended, a dark, ominous shape hovering just above them, and from its underside, a beam of light shot down, illuminating the narrow crevice. Grant shielded his eyes, the brightness nearly blinding. "They'll be here soon," she whispered, her hand still clasped tightly in his. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the hum. Zarya's eyes glowed, the light within her intensifying. "You stay here. This is my battle now." But he didn't release her hand. Not a chance. The ship's doors opened, revealing several tall, armored figures with eyes as dark as obsidian and expressions carved from stone. They moved with a mechanical precision, their weapons gleaming in the harsh light, focused solely on the glow emanating from Zarya. One of them stepped forward, his gaze fixed on her. "Queen Zarya," he intoned, his voice as cold and unyielding as metal. "You know why we're here." She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with defiance. "I do." Grant tightened his grip on her hand, feeling a surge of anger rise within him. "You'll have to go through me first," he spat, positioning himself between Zarya and the advancing soldiers. The leader raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "You are but a mortal. Your life is inconsequential." Zarya took a step forward, her voice calm but unwavering. "Grant is not inconsequential to me," she said, her gaze never leaving the leader's. "And I would suggest you remember that." The leader's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, Zarya's hand tightened around Grant's, and he felt a strange warmth flow through him, filling him with an energy he couldn't comprehend. "Grant," she murmured, her voice filled with a fierce intensity. "This is goodbye." Before he could protest, she released his hand and stepped forward, her entire being radiating with a light so powerful it seemed to eclipse the sun. The soldiers faltered, shielding their eyes, but Zarya pressed forward, her gaze fixed solely on their leader. "This ends now," she whispered, her voice echoing with a strength that shook the very earth beneath them. And with that, the light within her exploded, a blinding flash that consumed everything in its path, filling the desert with a brightness so intense it felt as though the sun itself had descended upon them. Grant stumbled backward, shielding his eyes as the blast of energy surged around him, its force sending him sprawling to the ground. He felt the heat, the raw power of it pulsing through the air, and then silence. When he finally opened his eyes, the desert was still. The ship was gone, and the soldiers had vanished, leaving nothing but an empty stretch of sand where they had stood. He looked around, heart pounding, searching for any sign of Zarya, but she was gone. The realization hit him like a blow, a hollow ache settling in his chest. She had sacrificed herself, given everything to protect him, to end the threat once and for all. He stood alone in the vast, empty desert, the silence pressing down on him. And yet, as he looked out across the sand, he felt her presence lingering, a faint warmth that seemed to echo in the wind. "Goodbye, Zarya," he whispered, his voice breaking. For a long moment, he stood there, letting the silence settle around him. And though the ache in his chest remained, there was a strange sense of peace, a quiet understanding that she had fulfilled her purpose, and in doing so, had given him a chance to continue his life. With a heavy heart, he turned and began the long walk back to his cabin, each step feeling heavier than the last. The desert stretched endlessly before him, vast and silent. But he knew that he would carry Zarya's memory with him, her light a constant reminder of the sacrifice she had made. And as he walked, he couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, somewhere, she was watching over him, a distant star in the endless night. The cockpit lights flickered as Captain Reese Calder squinted out the viewport, taking in the blue world remnants of a nebula collapsing into darkness, the dying glow of ancient stars casting odd shadows across his face. He tapped a finger against the console, hearing the familiar soothing hum of his vessel's systems as they worked, a faithful orchestra of machinery that, so far, had kept him alive. But it was the silence of the galaxy that always got to him. A lifetime of military runs, smuggler contracts, and now mercenary work. They all ended in the same silence, the hollow kind that seeped into his bones and stayed there. If the emptiness of space didn't swallow you, the silence would. His fingers grazed the edge of a scar on his forearm, a reminder from one of his earliest campaigns, and he chuckled, though the sound was humorless. This job would pay well, assuming his contact actually showed up. And if she didn't? He'd be no worse off. A few more scars, perhaps. A bounty on his head, probably. But nothing he couldn't handle. Nothing he hadn't endured before. A soft chime from his comm console drew his attention. He leaned in and hit a button, an eyebrow raising as a holographic screen flickered to life, revealing the haughty, unyielding gaze of Seraphine. "Captain Calder, I presume." Her voice was low and cold, her words clipped and edged like glass. Behind her, the faint metallic hum and muted lights of her own vessel hinted at luxury, perhaps even decadence. But nothing about her was soft. Her gaze was sharp as a blade, as if she'd spent her entire life wielding it to cut through anything that dared to obstruct her. "And you must be the princess," he replied, his tone laced with a mocking respect that he knew would set her on edge. He leaned back, crossing his arms. "I half expected you wouldn't show." Her lips curved slightly, a bare hint of a smile that could have been either amusement or contempt. "Trust me, Captain, I don't enjoy this arrangement any more than you do." "Glad we're on the same page, then." He gestured toward her image with a flick of his wrist. "So, what's the plan, Your Highness? We gonna talk about your kingdom's many enemies, or get right to the part where you tell me who wants you dead?" Her smile vanished. "Your job is not to pry into my past, Calder. Your job is to get me to the Shadran Nebula without getting us killed. Or have you already forgotten that?" He chuckled, more genuinely this time. "Believe me, I couldn't forget it if I tried. You made sure to remind me in every message. And you know," he added, leaning forward, "for someone who supposedly doesn't trust anyone, you're awfully free with information about this weapon." He noticed her flinch, a quick tightening of the jaw, a flicker in her otherwise calm expression. It was gone in an instant, and she straightened, as if brushing off his words. "I trust nothing but necessity, Captain, and it is necessary that we reach Shadran quickly and without alerting other interested parties." "And if we run into trouble?" He arched an eyebrow, leaning closer to the hologram, testing her boundaries. "What then?" "I'm not risking my ship for your half-baked mission unless I know what I'm up against. Trouble is inevitable. I'm paying you to handle it." Her voice was cool, dismissive. "Or do you need an itemized list of every possible threat?" "Just wanted to make sure you understand the risks," Reese said, feigning casualness. He let the words hang in the air, watching her reaction. It was subtle, but she stiffened ever so slightly. A small tell. Whoever she was, this mission wasn't just dangerous for him, it had stakes for her too. High stakes. "Meet me in the Dracot system," she said abruptly. "My ship has limited jump capabilities, and I'd rather not waste time docking if I don't have to. I'll send you the coordinates." Reese suppressed a smirk, enjoying the hints of tension creeping into her voice. It was rare to see cracks in the mask of someone who probably spent most of her life being perfectly in control. "I'll be there. Try not to bring half the galaxy with you, Princess." The screen went dark before he'd even finished speaking. Hours later, as the Cerulean Phoenix descended into Dracot's orbit, Reese felt a pang of apprehension he hadn't felt in years. The Dracot system was known for its erratic weather and hostile terrain, half frozen, half desert, and teeming with raider activity. Not a place for leisurely get-togethers, much less secret rendezvous with a princess on the run. A small blip appeared on his radar, blinking steadily. He peered at it, then smirked as the coordinates matched the ones Seraphine had sent. The princess was punctual, at least. As he docked, he heard her voice crackle over the comms. "Board my ship, Captain. I've prepared the flight plan." "Already giving me orders," he muttered, barely suppressing a grin. "You're really settling into the role, aren't you?" The airlock hissed open, and he stepped into her vessel, a sleek silver craft lined with alien symbols that pulsed faintly, each rune glowing with a strange rhythmic light. The ship was an odd blend of technology and ancient design, elegant and imposing like her. The corridor stretched into a dimly lit chamber where Seraphine stood, arms crossed. Her long, dark robes flowed around her, making her appear almost spectral. She glanced at him, her eyes scanning him with a mixture of impatience and disdain. "You're late," she said. "I'm on time," he replied coolly, "just taking in the decor. Admire it later. We need to move." Without waiting, she turned, her steps precise and quick as she led him deeper into the ship. He noticed her glancing over her shoulder, her expression guarded. She was looking at him as if he were the threat, which was fair enough, he supposed. They barely knew each other, and she was about to trust him with something that, if the rumors were true, could change the fate of her entire galaxy. As they entered the command chamber, Seraphine keyed a sequence into the console. A holomap burst to life, projecting a series of star systems in intricate detail, a pulsing point marking their destination, the Shadron Nebula. Reese whistled. "That's some heavily restricted space. Do you have any idea who'll be waiting for us if we're caught?" She shot him a look. "We're not going to be caught." He snorted. "Easy for you to say." Her gaze hardened. "I've risked everything for this mission. I have no home to return to if I fail, no allies left. I chose you, Captain, because you supposedly know how to avoid detection." He raised an eyebrow, studying her closely. She was good at hiding her fear, but it was there, a faint shadow lurking behind the fierce determination in her eyes. Whatever brought her here, whatever mission or mistake led her to put her trust in a stranger like him, it haunted her. "So you're the one with everything to lose," he said softly, almost to himself. "Good to know." Her voice dropped to a near whisper, her eyes narrowing. "Do not mistake desperation for weakness, Captain." A beat passed in heavy silence before he inclined his head, the hint of a smile curving his lips. "Duly noted, Princess." She turned away, her voice hardening as she refocused on the holomap. "Now, let's go over the route. The Shadron Nebula is patrolled by Imperial scouts. We'll be crossing into one of the oldest uncharted territories known to my people. It's perilous, but it's our best chance of reaching the weapon undetected." "Do you even know what kind of weapon we're dealing with?" he asked, studying her face. "Not exactly." Her tone shifted, a mix of reluctance and reverence. "Only that it was created to end wars, not start them." "Funny," Reese muttered, shaking his head. "In my experience, weapons rarely know the difference." For a moment she almost smiled, as if there were something human buried beneath her icy exterior, but it faded, replaced by that same hard, distant look. "Then let's hope this one is different," she said quietly. "Or neither of us will be returning from this mission." With that, she turned to the console, preparing their departure. Reese watched her, 1,000 questions filling his mind. The princess was keeping secrets, no surprise there. But for the first time in a long while, he found himself wondering if the mystery she guarded so closely was worth the danger they were about to face. The lights of the Shadron Nebula glittered ahead, a mesmerizing array of blue and violet hues swirling in silent, indifferent beauty. Reese leaned forward in the cockpit, studying the map of their approach route on the console, tracing it with a gloved hand as he spoke. "All right, so we slip into this pocket of low radiation here." He tapped a small dip in the sensor readings. "According to this data, we should be able to avoid most of the Imperial scans." Seraphine, seated beside him, gave a curt nod, her gaze intense as she scrutinized the map with a level of focus that bordered on obsession. She'd shed the formal robes, opting instead for a sleek, dark flight suit that clung to her like shadows. She looked more like a warrior now than a runaway royal, but then Reese supposed she was both. "How long will the radiation give us cover?" she asked, her voice clipped. "Long enough," Reese replied, though his voice carried a note of unease. "But once we hit this pocket here, all bets are off." He pointed to a vast, empty stretch of space beyond the nebula, uncharted and cloaked in mystery. "This is where it gets dicey." "I'm aware of the risks, Captain," she replied sharply, her eyes flashing. You don't need to spell them out. He raised an eyebrow. Just trying to keep you alive, princess. The corner of her mouth twitched, but whether it was irritation or amusement, he couldn't tell. A little faith wouldn't kill you, Calder. I wouldn't have chosen this route if it were certain death. Forgive me if I don't rely on royal intuition when my neck's on the line. He settled back into his chair, shooting her a challenging look. But let's hear it. What exactly are we risking our lives for? Seraphine hesitated, her gaze dropping to the console, and for a moment she looked almost vulnerable. But the mask returned as quickly as it had slipped, her face hardening into its usual stony expression. I told you, she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. An ancient weapon, one powerful enough to end the wars tearing my people apart. Rhys frowned, drumming his fingers against the console. That's a pretty vague description, princess. Weapons come in all shapes and sizes, and most of them don't care who they destroy. Seraphine turned to him, her eyes unreadable. This weapon? It's different. It's not just a tool of destruction. It was designed with intention, with consciousness, some say. Rhys felt a chill creep down his spine. He'd heard of strange weapons, bioweapons, tech that could twist the mind, even rumors of weapons with artificial intelligence advanced enough to make choices. But something about the way she said it, with a hushed reverence, unsettled him. A weapon with a mind of its own, he said slowly, as if tasting the idea. And you think you can control it? She flinched, almost imperceptibly. I don't intend to control it, Captain. Only to release it. Let it fulfill its purpose. And what purpose would that be? He pressed, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted the answer. She stared at him, her gaze steady but distant. To bring balance, to put an end to the chaos that has fractured my people, that has made enemies out of allies and turned home into a war zone. Balance. Rhys snorted, though he softened his tone when he saw her frown. Balance sounds nice, but that kind of power usually comes with a cost. Are you sure you know what you're doing? She didn't answer, her gaze drifting back to the nebula outside, as if seeking answers in the swirling stars. The silence stretched between them, heavy and fraught, until a soft chime interrupted, signaling an incoming scan. Rhys's fingers flew across the console, rerouting their power to the cloaking shields and dampening their engine signatures. He exchanged a glance with Seraphine, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of worry in her eyes. Stay quiet, he whispered. This'll be close. The ship drifted in near total silence, a ghost gliding through the nebula's ethereal mists. The scan swept past, a wave of light and energy that brushed the edge of their hull, and then moved on, its ominous glow disappearing into the void. Seraphine exhaled softly. That was close. Just a regular day in my line of work, Rhys replied with a grin, though his knuckles were still white from gripping the controls, but his smile faded when he caught her expression, half relief, half fear. She wasn't used to close calls, wasn't used to being the prey. Whatever life she'd left behind, it hadn't prepared her for this kind of risk. We're clear, he said after a moment, though he didn't move his hands from the console. At least for now. Good. She glanced at the console, adjusting their course. There's a shortcut through the next sector. It'll cut our time by half. Rhys raised an eyebrow, peering at the map. The shortcut she mentioned was a narrow strip of space known for gravitational anomalies, a place where navigation systems often malfunctioned, and ships were torn apart by invisible forces. It was the kind of place that didn't forgive mistakes. You really want to take that risk? He asked, his voice laced with skepticism. We don't have a choice, she replied firmly, her gaze hard. The longer we're out here, the greater the chance of being discovered. Unless you'd rather turn back? Rhys gave a low chuckle, shaking his head. Not a chance, princess. I'm just surprised you're willing to roll the dice. Her eyes flashed with a steely resolve. Sometimes, the only way forward is through. They fell silent as the ship drifted into the narrow channel, the sensors crackling with static as they entered the sector. Rhys kept his hands steady on the controls, his focus sharp as he navigated through the shifting gravity fields, his heart pounding with each tremor that rattled the hull. "Steady," he murmured, more to himself than to her. The ship groaned as an invisible force pulled them sideways, and he fought to keep them on course, his muscles straining with the effort. Beside him, Seraphine watched, her face pale but resolute, as if she'd resigned herself to whatever fate awaited them on the other side. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they broke through the last gravitational pocket, the stars ahead stabilizing into familiar patterns. Rhys let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, his hands relaxing on the controls. "We made it," he said, almost surprised. Seraphine gave a tight nod, her gaze distant as she scanned the star map. "Thank you, Captain." Rhys glanced at her, studying the faint lines of exhaustion etched into her face. "You're welcome, but don't thank me yet. We're not out of the woods." Her eyes flicked to him, a spark of amusement glinting in their depths. "And here I thought you were an optimist." "Realist, Princess," he replied with a smirk. "I like to keep my expectations low. That way, I'm never disappointed." She shook her head, but he caught the hint of a smile tugging at her lips. "A charming philosophy." They settled into a companionable silence, the quiet hum of the ship's engines filling the cockpit. For a moment, Rhys allowed himself to relax, savoring the calm before whatever storm lay ahead, but his reprieve was short-lived. A sharp beep cut through the silence, the console flashing with an urgent warning. Rhys's heart sank as he read the display. A ship was approaching. Fast. "Damn it," he muttered, his hands flying over the controls. "Looks like we've got company." Seraphine leaned forward, her gaze narrowing as she studied the readings. "Imperial scouts?" Rhys shook his head, his brow furrowing. Number something worse. The radar revealed a sleek, ominous vessel bearing the unmistakable markings of a bounty hunter, an elite class, judging by its speed and armament. Rhys felt a surge of dread. Whoever was in that ship wasn't just after a payday, they were here for blood. "Can we outrun them?" Seraphine asked, her voice tense but steady. "Not a chance," Rhys replied, flipping a switch that powered up the weapons. "They'll catch us in minutes if we try. Our best bet is to fight." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. Instead, she reached for a panel on the console, activating a series of defensive protocols that Rhys hadn't even known her ship possessed. He raised an eyebrow, impressed despite himself. "Didn't know you had that kind of tech," he said, his tone admiring. "Just a precaution," she replied, her voice carefully neutral. "I don't take chances, Captain." The enemy ship closed in, its weapons systems lighting up like a deadly constellation. Rhys gripped the controls, his pulse pounding as he prepared for combat. "Hold on!" he shouted, diving into a sharp evasive maneuver, just as the bounty hunter fired, a volley of plasma bolts tearing through the space they'd occupied seconds before. The ship shook with the impact of near misses, the console lighting up with damage reports. Rhys clenched his teeth, weaving through the onslaught with practiced skill, his focus razor-sharp. "Return fire!" Seraphine shouted, her voice fierce and commanding, and Rhys felt a strange surge of respect for her. She wasn't the type to cower in the face of danger. He targeted the bounty hunter's ship, unleashing a barrage of plasma rounds that seared through the void, striking its shields with a bright flare. The enemy vessel veered, momentarily thrown off course, and Rhys seized the opportunity, pressing forward with a burst of speed. "Nice shooting," Seraphine said, her voice breathless but steady. "Just doing my job, Princess," he replied, a hint of a grin tugging at his lips. The battle raged on, each maneuver a deadly dance as they dodged and countered, their lives hanging by a thread. But as the bounty hunter's ship took another hit, its shields flickering, Rhys felt a surge of hope. They were winning. Against the odds, they were winning. But just as he dared to believe they might make it out alive, the enemy ship launched a final, desperate attack. a torpedo hurtling toward them with terrifying speed. "Brace yourself!" he shouted, slamming his hand down on the emergency shields. The explosion rocked their ship, the force of it tearing through their defenses, and for a heart-stopping moment, Rhys thought they were done for. But as the smoke cleared, he realized they were still alive. Barely, but alive. He turned to Seraphine, his chest heaving with adrenaline, and found her staring at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of relief and something else. A glimmer of respect, perhaps. "Not bad, Captain," she murmured, her voice soft but steady. Rhys managed a grin, though his hands were still shaking. "Not bad yourself, Princess, but let's not make a habit of it." She nodded, a faint smile ghosting across her lips. And as they drifted onward, the vast emptiness of space stretching out before them, Rhys couldn't shake the feeling that this mission was only just beginning, and that the real danger lay ahead, waiting in the shadows. The ancient planet loomed ahead, a monolithic silhouette against the backdrop of stars, silent and foreboding. Its surface was scarred, a landscape etched with the memories of battles long since forgotten, a testament to wars that had shaped and shattered entire civilizations. Rhys adjusted the ship's controls with a steady hand, his gaze fixed on the planet's surface below, dark and barren. The silence inside the cockpit was almost oppressive, broken only by the occasional hum of the ship's systems. His eyes slid to Seraphine, whose face was tense with something he couldn't quite read. "You're sure about this?" he asked quietly, breaking the silence. Her gaze remained forward, unblinking. "I'm not sure about anything anymore," she admitted, and he saw her fingers tighten around the edge of the console. "But if the weapon is here, we can't leave it buried. Not with the Empire closing in." Rhys frowned, his instinct to protect her warring with a deep, instinctual fear he could barely understand. "This weapon," he murmured. "It's more than just technology, isn't it? You spoke of it as though it has a mind of its own." She turned to him, her eyes solemn, distant. "You're right," she said softly. "This isn't just a weapon in the way you'd think of it. It's something alive." Rhys felt a chill ripple through him. The whole journey, he'd sensed there was something more she wasn't telling him, a mystery she held like a shield between them. And now here it was, the truth finally emerging. "What does that mean?" he pressed, his voice low, urgent. "If it's alive, if it can think—" "It was created as a last resort, in a time of desperation," she interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. "When my ancestors faced extinction, they turned to a technology forbidden even by their standards. They engineered something to protect them, something capable of making choices, a sentinel, a guardian, and an executioner." Rhys stared at her, the weight of her words sinking into him. "And you think it'll bring balance? What if it turns on us?" Seraphine's gaze hardened, her jaw set. "That's the risk we take. But if it can end the wars, if it can save my people from annihilation—" She trailed off, her voice wavering for the first time. He reached out, his hand resting on hers. "There's always another way, Seraphine." She looked down at their hands, her expression unreadable. "I wish I could believe that," she whispered, and for the briefest moment, he saw a flicker of doubt, a crack in the armor she wore so fiercely, but then she pulled away, standing and straightening her shoulders, the mask sliding back into place. "We're wasting time, Captain. Prepare for descent." He hesitated, but he saw the determination in her eyes, the kind of resolve that wouldn't bend. With a resigned sigh, he turned back to the console and initiated the landing sequence. As they descended through the planet's thin atmosphere, Rhys felt a strange, oppressive energy pressing down on them. The air outside shimmered with a faint, electric glow, like the lingering echo of something ancient, something powerful. They landed in a clearing surrounded by jagged cliffs, the ground cracked and scarred. Rhys powered down the engines, glancing at Seraphine as she strapped on her utility belt, checking her equipment with swift, practiced movements. She looked like a warrior prepared to face her destiny, or her doom. He couldn't resist one last warning. Once we're down there, there's no guarantee we'll be able to control whatever we find. If things go sideways—" She gave him a fierce look. "I won't back down, Captain. I've come too far for that." He nodded, respecting her resolve even as it filled him with a sense of dread. Together they exited the ship, the eerie silence of the planet swallowing them as they made their way toward a narrow passage that led into the heart of the cliffs. The path twisted and turned, descending into darkness, the walls covered in strange, indecipherable symbols that glowed faintly, casting an otherworldly light. Rhys ran his fingers over them, feeling an odd warmth beneath his touch, as though the symbols pulsed with a life of their own. "These markings," he murmured, but Seraphine shook her head, her face set. "They're warnings," she said simply, her voice echoing in the narrow passage. "And guides, in a way. They're meant to keep intruders out." Rhys glanced at her. "Doesn't seem like they did a great job, seeing as we're here?" She gave him a wry smile. Perhaps they were waiting for the right intruders. They pressed on, the air growing colder, thicker, as they delved deeper. Finally, they reached an open chamber, vast and dark, the ceiling lost in shadow. At the center stood a massive stone pedestal, and atop it lay an object that defied description, dark and shifting, as if it were both solid and ethereal at once. Seraphine took a step forward, her face pale as she stared at the object. "There it is," she whispered, her voice trembling. Rhys felt a strange pull toward it, an urge to touch it, to understand it. But something held him back, an instinct that warned him of the danger that lay within. "Are you sure about this?" he asked again, his voice barely audible. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached out, her hand hovering over the object as though she were about to take it. But before she could, a sudden tremor shook the ground, the walls vibrating with a deep, resonant hum. Rhys grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "What the hell was that?" She looked at him, her eyes wide with shock. It's awake." The hum grew louder, filling the chamber with a throbbing energy that made the air vibrate, and the object on the pedestal began to glow, pulsing with a dark, malevolent light. "Seraphine, we need to go," Rhys said, his voice urgent, but she shook her head, her gaze fixed on the object. "Number, this is what I came here for. It's my destiny." Rhys stared at her, disbelief and fear warring within him. "Your destiny is to live, Seraphine, not to throw yourself into some ancient nightmare." She turned to him, her eyes filled with a strange, almost otherworldly light. "This is my purpose, Captain, to awaken this power and set it free." Before he could stop her, she reached out and touched the object, and a blinding light filled the chamber, searing through the darkness. Rhys shielded his eyes, but the force of the energy threw him back, slamming him against the wall. When he opened his eyes, the chamber was empty, the pedestal bare. Seraphine was gone. Stunned, he staggered to his feet, looking around wildly. "Seraphine!" he shouted, his voice echoing in the silence. There was no answer, only the faint hum of the energy that lingered in the air, a cold reminder of the power that had been unleashed. Despair filled him as he realized the truth. Whatever Seraphine had awakened, it had taken her with it, leaving him alone in the dark, with nothing but the memory of her fierce determination and the weight of the choice she had made. He stumbled back to the ship, his mind numb, his heart heavy. The journey had ended, but not in the way he'd hoped. The weapon was gone, buried once more in the depths of space, along with the woman who had believed she could wield it. As he sat in the cockpit, staring out into the void, he felt a strange sense of peace mingled with sorrow. Perhaps she had found her destiny, in the end, though it was one he would never understand. With a heavy heart, he set a course for home, leaving the ancient planet and the secrets it held behind.